Story is from the Lita side. Mock my mother's death. I bankrupt you. So this could be a very, very long story. I'll try to summarize where and when I can. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to an apartment in 2010. The house as a whole was a renovated townhouse split between two sides, with two apartments on the bottom and two apartments upstairs addresses, ending in 126, 128 accordingly. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment, as it was a much older building that I had ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. On the initial walkthrough, we noticed that the only problem was that there was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised us that he would get it fixed ASAP. 1 year to the day that we moved in there was a loud crash at 4 a.m. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed and there was tiling and wood all over the floor and in the bathtub. Now Kate was typically the aggressive one, while I was more passive and laid back, and she kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she got in touch with him at around 9 p.m, she explained what happened and insisted that it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. Now this is where I got mad. I went outside to have a cigarette and to call him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he began trying to talk to me as a bro and kept saying, "Dude, I'm going to get someone out there, but it's going to take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he began yelling about his girlfriend and her knowing the law. What he was unaware of was that I had read the tenant laws in my state, and so, as he tried to lie, I waited until he was finished, and I then recited the law stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, then the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved, meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbor Phil was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with the J on speakerphone, if he was assigned as the super. He laughed and said, "No." Dejected, Jay said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it leads to two conclusions. 1. If you're going to lie, then there has to be a consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. 2. This is where a feud started between me and my Kate versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later. Jay stopped coming to the house and his mum began doing the pickups. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off and we were working with Social Security for food, health and housing insurance. We were approved for all 3 in April, but we would not get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave a summons saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and going before the judge, here's the summation, or rather, a non-verbatim account, of how the case went. Judge, does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment? Us. Yes, Your Honor. Hands over paperwork showing that he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge, I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here? Jay, well, Your Honor, they have been bullying. Judge, I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed. Suffice it to say, Jay and his mothers were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mom came knocking, looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the check in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home and to please just respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. "Ooh, my mommy just died. Woe is me. She probably had it coming. I don't care if your entire family is dead. I want my money." She smiled smugly, proud with what she had just said. I saw red, and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check, and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so f***ed up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you would expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by to not open the door. I waited until Og, since that was the month before the lease was going to run out, and we knew they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to Town Hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now it's important to know several things. 1. I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah on the other side of the downstairs floor had moved out in July, and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose on the upper right apartment. 2. I had gotten permission and her spare key so I could let the inspector in Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right side to let him in on Tom's now vacant apartment. 3. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and myself. The inspector came and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house first, noting that wires were exposed. There was an old empty dryer along with other odd clutter in the backyard. I brought him inside the shared entrance, and, as I was counting on, he noticed that the last inspected dated back to 1994, 18 years. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. For our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom, and the bubble in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There was flammable items, along with gasoline and a pack of matches sitting right beside it. 2 things that I did not know was: 1. The fire door that separated the 2 sides did not close all of the way, rendering it moot. To be honest, I had never heard of a fire door until that day. 2. On the right, 128 portion, basement side, there was a toilet that had blown up. It had coated the surrounding walls, and the leakage prevented us going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time, the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside, and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back portion. I kindly and coyly asked, "Well, how much will it cost right now?" He scratched his head and said, "Around 20–30K from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments." I thanked him, and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, though I did ask him to send me a copy with the list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got the updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owed all current fines, and no one could not move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. Because 3 out of 4 were vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell on her, they looked into the records, and she was fined for each time she had broken that rule, $750 per. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. No, fuck that. I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mom. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants, and said I was a concerned tenant from another property and asked if they had any problems with their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartment in very poor to intolerable levels, and that the mum was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone turned to litigations. She was threatened that they would summon the inspector, or, more often than not, the people would move out. She'd refuse their deposit and sink those into cosmetic repairs so that the apartment looked nicely furnished. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were of upper-lower class minorities. So being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other two towns and asked for an inspection to be done with at least one tenant, if not more, would be awaiting the inspector when they came. Turns out that she faced pretty much the same infractions on every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over were given a mysterious head-up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mom had been in the landlord business for about 35 to 40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally one block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy, but also saw that his mother was also trying desperately to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, 2014, that she too had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment 2 days in Oct. Of 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy, I'm guessing to scream at me and or Kate, so I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no parking zone and they kept looking up at the second floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where they hurt the most. Their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just fucking fixed the ceiling before it collapsed. J. TL. DR. Had a couple of slumlords, they pushed me to a place where I snapped. And so, I went a bit crazy and bankrupted the slumlord and his slumlord mother as well. Edit. Did some editing for clarification purposes, but I wanted to thank you all. I never expected to have anything I posted get anything other than a few hundred likes. I'm especially grateful for those that gifted me awards. Thank you so much. I wanted to clear up a few things that people have frequently left comments about. 1. I was always taught to use wit versus physical confrontation. What she said to me was a sucker punch, and I was already in a state of shock from holding my mom's hand when she took her last breath, asked to write a eulogy, and create 2 memory boards. I was already on autopilot when she said what she did, and the way I reacted was more me disassociating than anything else. If it was after the ceremony, I may have punched her until she was unable to stand up, whereupon I would continue to pummel her until someone pulled me off. She reminded me a lot of Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter, both in her mannerisms and attitude. 2. Why did I not go outside when they camped in front of my new address? 2 reasons. The first one being that the full brunt of my revenge had not fully played out yet, and secondly, because I hoped that the cop would give her a ticket. If he did, it was a little bit less money she would have, and she'd know that I was the one responsible. 3. Did they know it was me? Yes, they did. I called Jay for the deposit back after the 90 days were over. You need to allot the landlord 90 days to pay you. I knew he wasn't going to, though. When we left, I went around every room and took photos of every angle. I also had a friend, Justin, who did the same with his camera. Like a good tenant, should I also ask for the inspector to take photographs to show that we had caused no significant damage. When Jay told me that we had messed up the walls and the wood was warped, I responded with, "That's not what the inspector I called in said." He immediately hung up and blocked me. I lost the deposit, but it was still completely worth it. 4. On an unrelated note, and on the much pettier side before I moved out, I would go on to the front lawn, where he had put up the sign saying there was an open apartment, Tom and Hannah's, and put down his phone number. Each night I would use a marker to change the last 2 numbers. The modification was noticeable if you walked by during the day, but since I had the same marker and color, then if you were driving by you couldn't really tell. Every few days the sign would be replaced, and by the next morning, the modified number would be back. Even once we left, Jay was still not taking the whole "cannot rent until building is up to code" seriously, and so he was still putting up the signs. Since I was still in vengeance mode, and I lived on the same block, I began to not only change the number, but I also began printing out signs that read, "You do not want to live here, trust me. Signed, your friendly neighborhood tenant." That lasted until he took down the sign for good around November. I know it's late in the game, but if you find yourself under these sort of conditions, look up the tenant laws in your state and use the law to your advantage. Even it only inconveniences them, it's a step in the right direction. It's even better if you can find other tenants that are dealing with similar issues. Slumlords get away with this stuff a lot of time, and they do because they believe that people are ignorant to their rights. It's what happened to me at first, but I took the time to look up and study the law. The revenge was really brutal and destroying. The landlord's mocking OP during his mom's grief cost him all his finances and ruined his entire savings. The revenge was really brutal, and it was executed with utmost perfection. It was really cool to see landlord and his mom going bankrupt. The next story is from the Kung Fu Panda. Trick me out of my laptop, you'll give me your car. 13 years ago, I was in my late teens, living on my own and really struggling to live financially. One of the few possessions I had was an old laptop. My laptop had stopped working properly, and while I'm fairly proficient in using a computer, I had no idea about fixing them. I did a bit of searching on the internet, but couldn't get it working, so I asked my stepdad to take a look. He has a quick look and says, but he'll take it off my hands if I don't want it. So I said, sure. If it's broken, then it's no good to me. 10 minutes later, I walk in the room and he's using it. I asked if he fixed it, and he says, yeah, thanks for the laptop. I was obviously pissed. My mum says she wasn't getting involved, and his only response was that he did a quick internet search to find the fix, and I could have done the same. I broke, and he took one of my only possessions, even though he had a PC and a laptop already. A few months later, I was visiting my mum and stepdad when I had an idea. While I am useless with computers, I'm very competent with mechanics. Specifically, Audis, and my stepdad had a 2001 Audi A3. Before coming in the house, I went under his car and unplugged the oil level sensor and a vac line for the turbo. Later on that day, he went to go to the shop or something. When he started the car, it threw up oil warning lights on the dash and wouldn't boost, so he turned it off and had a look of concern on his face. I went out to ask him what's up, and he said that something gone majorly wrong. He says something along the lines of catastrophic turbo failure or engine failure. He's already spent quite a bit on repairs and didn't want to spend any more money on it, so spoke to my mum about just cutting his losses and scrapping it. I asked how much it's worth at the scrapyard, and he says $100, so I ever so graciously offer $120 to take it off his hands to maybe part it out, which he accepts. He signed over the logbook, title, and wrote me a receipt of purchase and handed the keys over. I walked outside, lifted the bonnet, pretended to look at my phone for a minute, went under the car and plugged the vac line and oil sensor back in, fired it straight up and drove around the block. When I got back, I gave him the thumbs up and said, "It's all fine now." His mouth was wide open and he was mega pissed, and my reply was, "You could have found the solution too with a quick internet search." He tried arguing that it wasn't fair, and if it's working, then I can't just take his car. But I just said he didn't have a problem tricking me out of my laptop, and that he's already signed the car over to me, so tough luck. My mum kind of laughed and said she's not getting involved and that it was his own fault. I still have the car to this day, and it's practically in showroom condition and runs sweet. Here's the old girl in all her shiny glory. Edit. Thank you for all the awards people have guilted me with. I didn't know any of these existed beyond gold and silver. Edit 2. Guys and gals, it's not that unbelievable. I tricked someone into thinking their car was broken so I could have it. Yes, it's 100% true. Yes, I know I'm an asshole, and I don't deny that it was a douche move, but I thought people might get a kick out of a bit of revenge. The revenge was masterclass. OP's stepdad wanted to take advantage of him, but took a brutal revenge by unplugging parts of his car and compelling him to sell the car at a fraction of its value. It was really satisfying. The next very interesting story is from unknown user. Try to take the credit for something I wrote. Let me destroy your academical's credibility and get you fired. I used to be in what in my college we call CEDA, an investigation group created by students that want to produce scientific articles, in this case psychology, and normally directed by a professor. I had just started college, didn't know how things worked, but thanks to a friend, I was able to enter one of the most exclusive CEDAs of our faculty. They were developing at the time 5 articles, and I was assigned to the newest one, a simple case review. But this story is not about me or my project. This story is about Rebecca, the friend that helped me before. Like me, Rebecca was a psychology major, doing her final year of college, and she was one of the lead investigators in the Crown project of the CEDA at the moment, a meta-analysis on conductual behavior therapy in schizophrenic patients around Latin American. This Eshite was not easy. She had spent a year and a half working on it, and when I joined the group, it was already in its final stages. Then the drama begun. Well, it had actually started midway project, when the first drafts were sent to the publications office. In my college, the publications office can be your best friend or your worst enemy as an investigator, and their suggestions are basically orders. Because the article dealt with a psychiatric pathology, they said it must have the support of our college's med school psychiatry department. The head of the department, who I will call Dr. Trash, put the condition that one of his residents had to be on the project. It was kind of rude to force them to include some random guy, but in the end, she and her group accepted. Enter Julian, the human incarnation of laziness. In a team of 5 individuals, Rebecca, Julian, and 3 other psychology students, Julian barely did any job, and whatever he made had to be checked and corrected by one of the others. Sometimes Rebecca doubted he even knew what the article was about from some of his comments. Fast forward again to the finish line of the project. It was basically done and only needed the approval of Dr. Trash. And this is where things went to hell. For those who don't know, psychiatrists and psychologists aren't always in the best terms, and this hidden feud can sometimes cause troubles when we interact. In this case, as Rebecca learned from one of the good psychiatry residents, the problem was that Dr. Trash didn't believe psychology should exist and thought of us as glorified life coaches. You see where this is going? With the project already done, he refused to approve it unless those credited as main authors were himself, reasonable to a point, department heads were always considered main investigators, our CEDA director and Julian. The others could only put their name as investigation assistants on the acknowledgement section. This was a total slap in the face. Even when she tried to argue that she was the one that designed the project in the first place and that Julian did the minimum, the man called her a liar, said her basic idea had needed a lot of corrections. False. And that he knew Julian had written most of the paper as there was no way she could have done it. Remember, he saw us as life coaches. Julian, being the douchebag he had been all year, didn't correct him and let the others drown while he was praised. In her last peaceful attempt, Rebecca asked why they could not put the names of all as authors, and Dr. Trash said that a bunch of unknown student names would only wrest credibility to the thing and refused the proposal. Lastly, he said that they could accept his terms or quit the project and leave him total control of the article. You may be thinking, this is impossible. This man is literally stealing the work from another person. Sadly, this is how investigation works sometimes, and is not uncommon that well-established investigators steal the work of unknown ones because, in the he said, you said, they are most likely to win. Even with evidence like mails and drafts, they can get their way. Rebecca and her friends were devastated, but even the director of the CEDA refused to give them his support. The important thing is that the article is published, not who takes the credit, was his reasoning. That's when Rebecca decided to go full suicide bomber. When she told her friends of her idea, warning them it would be the best if they leave the project before things escalated, they decided to stay and help her. The plan was to sabotage the article by modifying the statistical analysis they had made previously, basically the core of it all. The conclusion you got with the new results was the same as before. But anyone who read the thing thoroughly and checked the sources would see the data had been tampered, making it look that they had forged the results to their convenience. This was a tricky move because they had to make the modifications in between the last revisions with enough subtlety that Dr. Trash would not notice it when he corrected other parts of the text. They were extremely lucky he never checked the statistical component, partly because that was the CEDA's director responsibility and he had already given them the thumbs up. Finally, the article was completed and the work was sent to the publications office. Then it was just waiting until it finally made boom. About a month after submitting the project, all the implicated were cited to a meeting with the publications office, including Dr. Trash. The office had seen the altered results, and that meant they had to investigate the group for fraud. To the students and the resident, it could mean expulsion. For the director and Dr. Trash, they would be forbidden to publish again under the university's name, and in the worst-case scenario, they could be fired. And that is when Dr. Trash saw he had condemned himself. Because Rebecca and the others were just assistants, it meant that most of the responsibility was on himself and the other main authors. Blaming the students would give away the fact that they were way more involved in the process, admitting he had taken away the credit and that he had not checked the paper properly. In the end, he didn't have to decide how he wanted to be hanged, because the CEDA director spilled the beans in order to save his own neck. With the director's confession, Rebecca and the others could tell the truth and showed the publications office the real results and told them about the sabotage. The aftermath of this is very bittersweet. 1. The office started an investigation on Dr. Trash articles and those he sponsored, finding he had done this way too many times. He was fired after the news spread around, and as far as we know, he has not done any more publishing in indexed literature because no serious magazine will accept his submissions. 2. Because of all the drama, Rebecca's article was deemed too compromised by personal interests and was not accepted for publishing. So that year's hard work went directly to the trash. 3. CEDA director had to surrender his job as an investigator and the CEDA disbanded because there was no other professor available or willing to direct it. My little project died in here sadly. 4. Julian was put on probation by the medical faculty. 5. Rebecca and the others were banned from participating in other investigation projects or studies that were not related to their final thesis, but no more disciplinary actions were taken against them. Thanks for reading, Guy. Sorry for the long post. PD. Rebecca gave me permission to post this. TL. DR. Doctor and resident accomplice tried to take credit for a paper my friend wrote, so she sabotaged the article, triggering a disciplinary intervention that resulted in the doctor's firing and the end of his academic reputation. Edit. So this blew up at night. God, thank you guys for the prices. They are so many comments, I don't know how to answer all, but I will answer some of the most common questions. 1. Yeah, I am not from the USA. While my English is good, I want to believe, some words sometimes slip, like academicals. Sorry about that. 2. Some have suggested Rebecca to publish it on her own, but she told me she was tired of all the ordeal and decided to let it go. It was hard, but she didn't felt comfortable, and in the end, because it was a project born in the CEDA, it was owned by the university. More on this right now. She graduated a long time ago and is working in a clinic with little to no interest in academics, at least for now. 3. Many are wondering what our publications office is or why it is so important. Well, our publications office was created to help student research. When you submit your paper and they approve it, they sent it to good journals and oversee the whole process so that articles are published and get where they had to get. Believe me, this is a huge help, because journals are getting your work with the approval stamp of a recognized institution. Does every paper need to go through them? Depends. CEDAs are college entities, so any research done in them has to go through it and is technically owned by them. With what benefit, you may ask? Well, CEDA members have access to all our college resources, including labs, materials, databases, experts' help, etc. All this cost money. When you submit your project to our publications office, you also submit a budget that they will provide, meaning the students don't pay anything. And finally, the publication office is also in charge of the ethics committee, those who authorize any clinical investigation or experiment done within any of our health facilities. Because of all of these advantages, they are also extremely picky, and their moral code is strict because whatever they approve will have the college name on it. And my college has quite the reputation in my country, if I say so myself. This revenge was brilliant and bold. Rebecca's calculated sabotage not only exposed Dr. Trash's unethical behavior, but completely dismantled his career, ensuring he couldn't exploit future students. The next story is from Garmdian. Make me look bad on the job? Well, we'll see about that. I worked at a clothing store in a mall for a year and a half. It was not fun. But I was think back to my time there recently, and I forgot this golden gem of pro-revenge. So a new girl had just been hired, as many new people did in that job, and right away you could tell she thought she was hot shit. We're talking acting like a manager, talking how many hours she had, and worst of all, she wouldn't shut up about all the dudes she was banging, and how the money she got from them was the most important part. To put it lightly, she was a cold-hearted bitch who made everyone feel bad about their insignificant lives, as she put it. Here's where things go down. In our store, all the racks were milled steel bars and hooks, so really hard to break and really expensive. They could, however, be bent out of shape if enough heavy coats stay on them for long periods of time. Ms. Hot Shit here, though, it would be a good idea to impress the management by putting all the coats on the same rack using the milled steel bars instead of a circular rack that wouldn't warp. I protested, of course, as I'd been there longer, but she said, "I get paid more than you, so do what I say." She got hired as a key holder out of the gate, so she made $1 more than I did per hour. I go along with it, put the heavy winter coats up on the milled steel, and go about my life. Well, 2 weeks later, the milled steel is of course warped, and when management saw this, they flipped. Cheapo store. Any cost was bad to them. Anyways, she blames it on me, and I get written up for it. Now I refused to sign, so they gave me less hours, which also cut my pay. Because she lied, I was now making 50% less than before and had a formal written complaint against me. To say I was ticked off wouldn't even start. So I devised a plan. Go get back at her. You see, the drywall on the centre pillars had sustained water damage for an early melt earlier that year, making them extremely soft. However, they provide some of the largest coverage of shelf space in the entire store, meaning basically a good 20% of shelf space couldn't be used. Now the kicker is Ms. Hot didn't know about this as she came in a week after it had happened, and to the naked eye, you wouldn't think the pillar couldn't be used as there was banners on it to try and hide the yellowing. I may have suggested what a waste not being able to have product on the pillars was, and how, if someone could come up with a nice display, it would bring in a lot of customers due to how people could see it from the mall main floor. We were just off the food court. Her eyes lit up. Now here's the thing. I was taking a small break to a nice snowy lake cabin the next day, and the people she had working with her were the manager or the temps who were not allowed to handle marketing and logistics, i.e. putting shelves, rack up on the wall due to their cost, and the incident that got me wrote up. Now I knew she wouldn't want the managers to see it because she wanted all the glory from it. She wanted to show to our 3 stores in the mall that her store was the best while the managers weren't around. So she, being with a temp, and them not being able to put up shelving, put the heavy winter clothing on milled steel racks attached to the soft drywall pillars. Within a week, the drywall on the pillars collapsed and ruined $500 worth of product. Now she tried to shift blame on me, but I was away for the whole week, so it could not have been me, because obviously that can't happen if I'm in the forest, hundreds of miles from civilization. So no dice there, and she promptly got charged with the repair, demoted to sales associate, and written up for what they finally realized was not just this, but the one they wanted me to sign. The repair was $2,500 plus the $500 stock that got destroyed when 40 pounds of dry wool came crushing down on it. But I wasn't done yet. You see, our manager in our store specifically was pretty chill, and she's still a personal friend to me. She had a group chat so we could talk off hours and keep up to date. Now, as I mentioned before, she wouldn't shut up about all the men she was playing and how the only thing that mattered was the money. And boy, oh boy, did she use the group chat to say a lot of this. Sometimes one of these dudes would come around and take her for lunch. Let's just say when she was in the back for a little while, finishing something up, that I let them see the text channel if they promised not to let her know I told them. So often they'd go on their lunch date, and after 1 or 2 days, she'd be down a man. Finally, this boiled over when one of them took her phone, saw how many guys she had being banging for money, and messaged all of them about how much of a lying cheat she was. After 2 months, her fountain of man money dried up, and how demoted to a sales associate she didn't have the money to spend on all her lavish nights out or designer clothing. She eventually moved up to another store for more hours and stole money from the till, causing her to get fired. A fitting end to a backstabbing ice queen, I think. I eventually left that job after half a year later to pursue my current job. TL. DR. Bitchy co-worker blames me for a task she commanded me to do, so I set her up to fail, cost her $3,000, ruin her relationships she's having with 10 different men. She then steals from the company and gets fired. Edit. To clear things up, to those saying that charging an employee for repairs is illegal 100%. However, she decided to instead take a pay cut until it was paid back and keep her job rather than be fired. Min wage here is $15 an hour, so she took the cut down to approx. $12 in order to pay it back. Also, this company is super sketch and will do anything not to pay for their mistakes, even going so far as to leave a hole in the roof, water damage, there for 10 months before fixing it, making so during spring nothing could be put there. The revenge was incredibly satisfying and well executed. OP's arrogant co-worker got what she deserved, and she paid the price for her actions. The next story is from an unknown user. Harass me, treat me like crap. That's going to cost you 5 years' salary. First, some background. A bit over 6 months prior to the start of this story, we had a change-up at the company I worked for. The old owner was a great guy that was retiring and handing the company off to his son, a real POS, just out of business school type. The son, with the mentality that the company is now his, went about restructuring, namely reassigning teams to different projects and leaving those that remained in their old positions to pick up double, if not triple, the workload. He did this all in the name of saving a little money. Unfortunately, my department, safety engineering, of which I was the team lead, was not spared from this effort. In the end, I had it out with the boss and department head, ultimately costing the company 3 months of my entire department working 80-plus hour weeks and forcing a huge year-end bonus to be paid out to us. Unfortunately, after my initial meeting with the new boss, i.e., the son, he took a liking to me, in a really bad way. Essentially, he really liked me and wanted to go out with me or sleep with me or however you want to put it. He even enlisted his friends and secretaries to help him. It went on for months, just blatant harassment. They even made comments about me losing my late husband, that I should just get back on the horse, so to speak. I kept everything, every email, every voicemail, and went to my best friend who happens to be a really good lawyer, a contract lawyer to be exact. So not exactly their area of expertise, but they knew enough to help. This friend drafted a letter to the boss, essentially a stop or we're going to start a big case over this kind of thing, and yeah, everything stopped. However, I was then moved from working in office to a work-from-home arrangement. I knew what was coming. They were going to do their best to get rid of me, so I started documenting everything. But as luck would happen, I received an email chain from the bosses. A good friend of mine in the office who was in the email chain added me to the CC list. And wouldn't you know, it was back and forth communication of them discussing how they would get rid of me and pin the blame on me. The email chain was just disgusting. They hated me so badly and wanted me gone, but because of my contract, they would have to buy me out. But being the cheapskates they are, they wanted me gone for free. So the company bosses started a campaign to try and torment me. They first tried to say that because now I work from home, they were required to install cameras in my home office to make sure I was being productive. Luckily, that did not work. You have to love contracts. They also tried assigning an impossible workload to me. But luckily, my team and I were almost like family and they picked up the slack. After 3 months of this crap, I get an email and a phone call from the HR department saying I was getting laid off indefinitely because there was just no work for me. This was complete given that we had several dozen projects we were working on. On a side note, in Ontario, there is no such thing as a layoff as, in the court's eyes, being laid off is considered an active dismissal, which is essentially the same as being fired. After this conversation with HR, I call my lawyer friend, almost in tears, just shouting, "Look what they are doing to me! Help!" She calms me down and tells me, "This is such a good thing. We have so much evidence against them." I had already forwarded and printed everything off that was sent to me, and it was lucky I did because a scant few hours after I was laid off my computer was remotely wiped clean. Everything was gone, leaving just a blank desktop. When I called the HR department to get copies of all my filed complaints, what do you know? Everything was gone. In their place was a bunch of reprimands that never happened, that I never signed or saw, dating months and months back, and all signed by the new boss, despite the fact that they were dated before he ever took control of the company. It was clear they were total but I got copies of everything to add to my stack of records. I texted all my old colleagues to let them know what was happening and that I am basically gone. Like I said earlier, we were like family, and with me on the way out, they started looking for better employment. Not only that, but they contacted all their friends who worked for the company to do the same. I was laid off on a Monday, and on Thursday, I walked into the office with my employment lawyer. I swear, the main secretary was on the phone to security the second she saw me walk in, and they were at the door in a matter of a minute. My lawyer simply handed her a legal document, a summons to meet for mediation at his office on the next Friday. During the following week, I received so many calls and text messages from the bosses, friends, secretaries, and people I knew in the office to just be friendly with the owner, to just drop it, and that they wanted to bring me back and forget about everything. Like hell, I was going back to such a hostile work environment. Friday finally comes, and into my lawyer's office, my former boss walks in with a squad of 4 of his lawyers to settle the matter. And off the bat, he offers me 3 months severance to end all of this because I didn't have any evidence to rebut the fake paperwork they had on file. At this point, my lawyer starts to bring out all the paperwork we had, namely copies of every complaint I had ever filed, which were all signed by the bosses, HR, and myself. Luckily for our case, I had made sure to take a copy of each complaint when it was written up. They didn't think I had anything? Oh boy, were they wrong. My lawyer made the case that in court it'd be obvious that all the paperwork they had on their end were forgeries. Nothing was signed by me, and he pointed out that there were dates with the boss's signature where he wasn't in the country, let alone working for the company yet. At that point, the boss and his lawyers went to speak privately. After about a half an hour, they came back with a much better offer, a full year's salary. But my lawyer was like, "Nah, we'll just go with what the contract says, plus go for damages in court." Given the recent changeover at the company, the lawyers seemed to know they couldn't afford this going to court, not to mention it would be so bad for the company's reputation. So they basically rolled over and asked, "What do you want?" We demanded 5 years' salary, plus the average bonus I would have made for each year, plus all the legal fees paid. It was a big, big win. But it didn't end there. I got a taste of blood and wanted more. I made phone calls to several companies where I had contacts and found jobs for every member of my team, and several members of other teams. By the end of a week, the company lost 10 of its most talented people. Not to mention most of those people had friends and colleagues that ended up following them to their new employers. The fallout was pretty bad. Before all of this, they had the pick of the litter when new university students graduated. But now, because they lost almost all of their senior people, they had no one to mentor new employees. Plus, word got out fast how they treat workers like crap, so no one with any talent would even think of getting near the company. As of today, the company is just a shell of its former self. It's still big, but it bleeds money. They also now have a problem with permanent staffing and are paying out the nose to hire subcontractors. Let's just say they don't make money like they used to. In fact, they have not started any new projects in something like 9 months. If something isn't done on the side of management to improve things fast, they will likely be going bankrupt in the very near future. Edit. I didn't really think this post would blow up. It is still happening fairly recently, like I have really loved Reddit. I just never thought I was interesting enough to actually share anything. But I am glad I have. It's been a great place to get things off my chest. Also, the fact people have enjoyed reading stories from my life has just made it so much better. Taking down Queen Karen, President of the HOA. Okay, this happened years ago, 1985 to be exact. I was 45 when this happened, 81 now. So after my second retirement, I started doing property management. I bought this 2,500 square foot luxury home with the sole intention of renting it out. Now I didn't know how bad the HOA was, but when I became the owner, I soon found out. This all took place in 2 years' time. Karen would literally have a problem with everyone in the neighborhood. Trash cans left out? Fined. Loud music after 10 p.m? Fined. Yard sale without permission? Fine. Removing dead plants and replanting without approval? You get fined. It went on and on like this. Now the community could run for the HOA board, but the HOA board chose the president. 6 out of the 10 members on the board liked Karen, so she always kept her job. Her husband was in the medical field, so he made a lot of money. It got to a point too where she was called Queen Karen in the neighborhood, and her dishing out HOA fines. Now I used to go in person to collect the rent because the people that rented my house were good friends of mine. I did this for months, so I would park my car by the front of the garage. I and my friends were having some music on, but it wasn't that loud. Queen Karen came over driving her golf cart and said, "Queen Karen, excuse me?" Me, "Yeah?" Queen Karen, "You have to turn that music down, it's too loud." I told her that it was 8 p.m. and that music that's even loud can be played until 10. She wasn't having it and demanded that I do so. Now my friends and I kept the music going and we were enjoying ourselves. She proceeded to get angry and fined me. Now, most people will just take the abuse and pay the fine, but not me. I went to the HOA board, contested the fine, and won. From that point on, Queen Karen made it her personal mission to destroy me. She would bitch and fuss about every little thing. I fought what I could, but I did end up paying for some of it. She also went after my tenants, which made things worse for me. I had a sit down with my friends one night to discuss the problem. When I parked my car, Queen Karen came over in her robe and said I have to park somewhere else. I did because I didn't want to start anything. We see her go back into her house and embrace a man that isn't her husband. We were being noisy and we came to the conclusion that she was cheating on her husband. Spoiler alert, she was. My friends and I told Queen Karen's husband. I'm sure he did some investigation because 3 months later, they divorced and he was moving his stuff out. Now, gossip said that Queen Karen got nothing because she was the one that cheated and she didn't have a job. So she wasn't entitled to the money. From this point on, Queen Karen had a massive decline in the quality of life that she had. She sold her car and got a cheaper one, and she adopted different dressing habits. But even after the divorce, she never got a job, and she was still living somewhat better than everyone else. Fast forward to 1986. In February, Queen Karen and the HOA had been giving out fines for very obscure things and increased monthly dues. Having trash cans out a couple of hours early or after the trash man left would result in a fine. Targeting people that had older or dirty cars goes on and on. Me and the other people, the community, were sick of the crap that she and the HOA were pulling. So at the next meeting, we made our voices our concerns. Queen Karen said that the community had been falling behind on repairs and that the dues and increase in fines were necessary, especially if people weren't maintaining their own property. She said that it was in the yearly budget report and that we should have read it. the other pissed residents, and I go and read the statement. Now, none of us read it because we take it as a junk mail and disregard it. But we read the whole statement cover to cover. Queen had increased the HOA budget 15%, and where that extra money was going remained unknown. We went over to her house the next day and demanded to know where the extra money was being spent. But she refused several times. She closed the door and went back to watching TV. We filing a joint lawsuit to find out where the money was going. In June, we found out. Cue the revenge. Queen Karen was living off HOA fines and dues. The increase is because she was running out of money. She still didn't have a job, so she embezzled from the HOA so she wouldn't have to get a job. She gets busted. We called the police for her embezzling the money. She was charged with fraud and extortion. The neighbors and I filed a joint lawsuit against Karen to get reimbursement as well. Because she had no money, so she had to mortgage her house to pay us all. She later went to federal prison for 6 years with no parole. Because she went away, no one was paying on her house. The bank foreclosed on it, and it was bought by someone else. So when she got out in 1992, she was homeless. Honestly, the majority of us didn't want to ruin her life like this. Had she toned down the excessive fines, we would have let her be. But she had to double down and steal from us because she didn't want to get a job like everyone else. Edit. Okay, I didn't think that I would have to explain this, but no, I didn't call Queen Karen a Karen in 1985. I just used the name here because I've been told that is what you call an undesirable, noisy white lady. I can't use her real name for privacy, so I named her that for the purpose of this story. The revenge was both clever and fitting, perfect in every aspect. Queen Karen's actions caught up to her in a spectacular way, not just by being exposed, but also by causing her financial ruin and downfall. The next story is from Beaker Cummings. Teacher verbally abused suicidal classmate. Now everyone knows. This was back in HS when I was 17. I'm currently 20. I was in a class for forensics, and this teacher was notorious for making fun of students. I'll call her Bitch Teacher. To put in perspective how much I hate her, I got a pet cockroach and named it after her. In this class, she would have students take attendance by lining up and answering a question at her desk before going to sit down. This is important for later. It started with things such as making fun of students who weren't in class to hear, poking fun at how they looked, their grades, their clothes, etc. Things slowly escalated as the year progressed to where she would mock my voice in front of everyone whenever I spoke. I also have a very growly voice because I used to get recurring scarlet fever for years, which permanently damaged my vocal cords. Said transgender people were a burden. We had a trans boy in the class, that depression wasn't real, etc. At first, it was fine. It's not like she was saying anything I've never heard before from my shitty classmates about each other. But then comes in my classmate who I'll call Small. Cuss. She's Small. Small was a quiet and very sweet girl. She was funny and always nice to everyone. But she had really bad depression and anorexia. And she would be bullied a lot because her parents weren't the best. She often came to class smelling of her dad's chain smoking and in old hand-me-down clothes. Because Bitch Teacher would only encourage the bullying, Small eventually started cutting and wearing hoodies all the time to hide the cuts. But everyone knew. It got to the point where 2 people would take advantage of her poor family and pay her to scratch words on her leg or arm in class with a safety pin. Bitch Teacher did all, and trust me, she knew. Fast forward a few weeks, and we all line up as usual. The question was, what's your favorite type of music? Me and Small come up. I answer, and I'm heading to my seat when Small quietly goes, I don't know, I don't really have one. To which, and I kid you the not, Bitch Teacher goes full volume with a smile on her face. Well, what kind of music doesn't make you want to slit your wrists? At this point, the entire class goes dead silent. She had gone too far, and Small immediately runs out of the class. Everyone is too shocked to know what to really do. So we just move on with class. I still wish I had gone to check on her. After that, I just couldn't stand Bitch Teacher. I couldn't stand her existence. I couldn't stand looking at her smiling face. I wanted to rip that smile off. Every time she breathed, I wanted to strangle her. I was done with this. I began secretly recording every time she made fun of us. I would record entire classes and crop out what I needed. And then, one tiring month later, I emailed them all straight to the principal. Close to half an hour of this bitch making fun of everyone, making suicide jokes, etc. I fumed about how inappropriate and unacceptable this was, and I demanded justice. And holy justice I got. Bitch teacher didn't show up for a few days. When she came back, she had such a dead look in her eyes. Finally, no more of that goddamn smile. The principal calls us all together. And in front of everyone. Her husband, the students, and staff. She was forced to formally apologize for making fun of a suicidal 16-year-old. The look on her husband's face told me all I wanted. After this, I only ever needed to see her smoking alone and hated at the liquor store. The smile never came back. I never told anyone what I did, but everyone just knew, and a sense of overwhelming relief was very much welcomed in the class. Small started going to therapy, and we became pretty good friends. She got the help she needed, she moved out of her family's home with her sister, and she developed healthier coping mechanisms. Is not a joke, and anyone who makes fun of someone even remotely entertaining the idea of suicide, this is what you deserve. To lose your job, lose your friends, lose your reputation, lose your husband, and a kid to name a cockroach after you. And for those of you in MS or HS dealing with bullying, a bad home life, or mental health problems, you can do this. Edit. IDK, some of you all can't read, I guess. She was fired. Lose your job. And to clarify on her husband, no, he wasn't called in from home. He was the algebra school teacher. The revenge was perfectly executed. The teacher's cruelty, especially towards a vulnerable student, was met with a well-planned, calculated response. The most satisfying part was the public apology. Kudos to OP. The next story is from Coffee Dash and Dash Insomnia. Don't stick to our agreement. You shouldn't have been stepping out. Okay, so I tried to post this on Petty Revenge, but it immediately and inexplicably got deleted. I guess it was a bit too much to be petty, so I'm posting it here instead. Here we go. Strap in for a long one, kids. This is a story from long, long ago in a galaxy far away. And by that, I mean it happened 3 years ago at a pizza place I used to work. I was a delivery driver for 6 years at various pizza places, picking up and moving on to greener pastures whenever it suited me. Granted, that only happened a couple times because I am unfortunately a very loyal employee. To be honest, I should have done that before this whole thing ever even happened. The store I was at was part of a nationwide franchise, and the waters had gotten choppy. All of the managers quit at once, and they just couldn't seem to get one to stick around. It got so bad that the area manager had to come in as acting GM and brought a manager from another store with him. These two are the main characters of this story. Well, besides me, obviously. For the purpose of this story, we'll call them Jeff and Kate, and I'll just be me. Jeff was 45 and had been with the company for a long time before I started. Worked himself up from the position of driver all the way to being the one to oversee about 20 stores. He was actually married to another area manager. I got along okay with Jeff for the most part. On the other hand, Kate and I got on like a house on fire, both being ladies of a similar age. She often confided things in me that she would soon bite her in the ass, figuratively. I considered myself a decent employee as far as pizza slingers go, came to work on time, did all of the dishes, got along with everyone, and had the best delivery times. Because of this, I usually landed all the best shifts, including opening on Saturdays. If you've never worked a tip job, you know that shift is the most coveted out there. Working through both the lunch and dinner rush before going home is well worth having to get up earlier. That information is relevant to the story, trust me. You see, there are always two drivers who do that shift. One comes in earlier and leaves earlier, and I was the one who got to come in just before we flipped on the open sign and went home once dinner rush began to die down. This is also relevant. The final vital bit of info you need for context is that my brother goes a bit wild at Christmas. His favorite thing to do is book an entire movie theater for everyone he knows to see a movie of his choice. This particular year was when The Last Jedi came out, and he is a Star Wars fanatic, so that was what we were going to see. Unfortunately, it would be at 6 on a Saturday, at least 2 hours before I would get off. At this point, Jeff and Kate had been with us for 3 months without managing to find suitable replacements. And I made an arrangement with the other opening driver to switch shifts because his ended right when I would need to leave to make the movie. I then cleared it with Jeff, and he agreed to let me go at 5:30. I was all set. Or so I thought. You see, that Saturday we started busy. Very busy. So busy that at 5:30, when I went to hand Jeff my slips, he had already dispatched me out on a double delivery. I took them, but reminded him that I needed to leave when I got back. I just hoped the trailers were long enough that I didn't miss much of the beginning of the movie. I got back from my double, and by that point it was already 6, and the theater was 20 minutes away. I had to leave. Once again, I went to hand my slips to Jeff, but he got in my face. "You leave when I say you can leave," he told me. "You're not going to let me?" I asked, incredulous that he was reneging on our deal. "I came in early. I did my time, damn it." He looked so very smug. "No." Well, I made a decision right then and there. There are so many pizza jobs out there that they needed me more than I needed them. I took my slip book, the kind that you see in restaurants. I've found they're great for delivery because not only can you store all of your slips in them, but they're hard enough for customers to bear down on to sign. Anyway, I slapped that in his hand and said, "Fine then, I quit." It was his turn to look incredulous. After making sure I meant it, he checked me out and I left the store fuming. I missed the entire opening of my movie. But the story doesn't end there. Oh no, you remember how I said Kate would confide in me? She loved to tell me all about how often she and Jeff would meet at a hotel after work. She even horrified me by telling me Jeff would turn off the cameras so they could have office when the store was empty, in a chair I had sat in multiple times. Kate was even so obliging to give insignificant details like the date and time this happened. So I put in an anonymous call to the franchise's HR and told them what to look for when it came to checking the tapes. I told them everything Kate had told me, but I still wasn't content with leaving it there. So I went to my local pizza place. That just happened to be in Jeff's wife's area. Remember when I said she was also an area manager, and I got to gossiping with the workers there while they made my pizza. I was well aware it would make it back to her. Food employees can't keep such juicy gossip to themselves. Jeff got demoted to store manager, then transferred to the same store in his wife's area I went to so she could keep an eye on him. I guess it didn't work out because last I heard Jeff's wife divorced him and he no longer worked for that franchise. And none of that would have happened if he had just let me leave on time. TL, DR, exposed my manager's cheating, including on company time on company property, because he didn't keep to a deal he'd agreed to. Edit. This got way more attention than I was expecting. Thank you so much to everyone who has awarded it. That being said, there are a few details I left out, because I thought they would bog down the post. I'll add them here. 1. Jeff had let the other morning driver, the one whose shift I took, go before me, despite claiming we were too busy for me to go too. 2. I said Jeff and I got along okay, and that was not entirely the truth. Before he started seeing Kate, Jeff had hit on me pretty relentlessly. I turned him down, of course. I am of the firm belief you should not dip your pen in company ink. And he did not handle the rejection well. He would often do petty things to get back at me, but it wasn't until this situation that it really got on my nerves. He was the kind of person who acted friendly to your face and did behind your back, exemplified best by cheating on his wife. 3. His wife had been out of town for a few months, training area managers out of state, which is probably why he got away with the affair for even that long. 4. He would have been caught eventually anyway. His and Kate's relationship was pretty open in our store because neither of them seemed to grasp the concept of Discretion. I just happened to be the one who blew the whistle. 5. Finally, 5. Jeff had a grudge against my brother because he sued the same company for having to work unpaid overtime. This was his attempt at over at once. The revenge was truly perfect. Jeff's petty behavior finally backfired, and he got what he deserved. OP did a wonderful job by exposing Jeff's secret affair and his abuse of power. In short, the revenge was a masterclass. The next story is from Vonadla. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. Note 1. This story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. I won't be able to answer many follow-up questions. It takes place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. Note 2. This happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. Note 3. I am not a native English speaker, and professional terms may be wrong. I'm happy to take any corrections. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened, and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies, from multiple countries taking weeks, if not months, to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no-bull kind of guy, who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interests, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards, that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects, and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate. And he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in, and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the 3 managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately cancelled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the Labour Board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business. And he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business signed by his former manager and the IT policy available and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held. Patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay. All duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious, but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice. Since the projects he had managed could not go on without him, he was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake, and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the Labour Board's decision. But until then, he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the Labour Board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The Labour Board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favour, and he got the normal damages: 3 months' pay damage and 24 months' pay severance package, including pension, and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10-15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an arsehole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations and the costs of her father's consultancy fees, and the costs of the Labour Board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shit-eating grin and, "What are you going to do? Fire me?" after that. Edit. Spelling corrections. The revenge was strategic and outclass. It is always wise for new administration to not mess up with veteran employees. The management paid for their short-sightedness. and OP's father got a very good opportunity. The next story is from Zhou Shuhua. Talk to me anyway, you please? Nah. Have fun losing the entire staff along with the juiciest of juicy contracts. This is a super throwback, but it still brings a smile to my face. Also, my writing sucks, so please excuse the grammatical errors. I was a rink rat growing up. The only day I wasn't in the skating rink were the adult and gay nights. Calm down, it was the 90s, and that's literally what it was called. Friday night, Saturday morning, and night. Along with Sunday morning and night, I was there. Hell, I didn't even leave between the morning and night sessions. I even went Tuesday nights as well. I was serious too. I dove deep into speed skating and not trying to toot my own horn, but I was pretty good and well known. Anyway, I'd been going to this specific skating rink for years and knew everyone. One day, it was right before I started 7th grade, the owner came up to me and asked me to go out onto the rink floor and tell some kids to slow down. I did and came back, and he asked me how would I like to make $7.50 an hour, to which I responded, "Do I also get in for free?" He laughed and said, "Of course." Boom! First job, and I wanted to be there anyway, so it was the biggest win-win of all time for me. To say I loved it was an understatement, and I did everything besides work the snack bar. DJ, skate counters, floor guard, janitor, hype man, you name it, and I did it. It was some of the greatest times of my life. So much fun, and the owner was super awesome. Also, we were paid under the table, so getting an envelope full of cash every week just felt like a bonus for having fun. To me, it wasn't a job, it was pure fun. It also helped that all my friends were regulars as well. A few years go by, and the owner sold to another guy, who we will call Tim. Tim could be an absolute nightmare to work for. He changed the entire dynamic of the place, and everyone felt it. Now, this skating rink was popular and extremely old. Lots of people all over the city knew of it. My mum and aunt skated there when they were kids, if that tells you anything. Some way or another, the new owner set up a juicy deal that had the rink started making a load of money. On Saturday night from 7-11, it was skating per usual, but from 11 2-ish, 3-ish was a club. A local hip-hop station came in there with local label Swish House and turned the place upside down for those few hours. Every week, and the place was poppin'. There must have been over 2K people in there on average, and at $20 per person, it adds up quick. Plus, the snack bar would never stop turning out food and drink. We were making stupid money. Bonus. We also found some good stuff when cleaning up as well. Money, knives, weed, jewelry. It was awesome. So Tim has it made, but sometimes he would fly off the handle for little things. All of us weren't sure what his deal was, but he would explode out of nowhere and start talking all kinds of nonsense. I'd started to have enough because we all had worked there for many years without issue. One night he went too far. I don't like being called outside of my name. It's a respect thing. My own mother didn't do it, and he for sure wasn't. For context, I was in 10th grade now. One night he was in some kind of mood, and for whatever reason was taking it out on everyone. I don't remember the exact situation, but he started freaking out on me at about 11:30 p.m. Now, Slim Thug and Paul Wall were in the building that night, so the place was extra packed. Why, more than usual, I'm sure we were breaking all kinds of fire marshal rules, LOL. He went ballistic and called me every name in the book, while I just stood there with rage building up in me. I'd had enough. For years, this place ran flawlessly, and everyone loved us, so he really didn't have a good reason to treat us in the manner he did. My plan was formed. I immediately gathered everyone else that was working, and we all decided that enough was enough. It was time for a lesson. I assembled the entire crew, and we'll all quit on the spot. All of us. That meant nobody to serve food, clean, help the Swisher House people, or just carry out general things that needed to be done when 2-3K people were in the building. He was stunned, his tone changed, and he became very sweet. We weren't having it. As an additional you, I called the other two people that were off and they showed up to quit as well. Tim had already reached out, so he assumed they were showing up to work. Nope. We left him with 0 workers on the absolute busiest of busy nights, and boy did it implode. He couldn't find anyone to work, so the place went to absolute shit that night. The on-duty officer told him he needed to figure something out, or he was going to close it down without workers. Well, he didn't. It closed down that night, and apparently without staff, it got nasty. People started having smoking, trashing the place and all kinds of stuff. Shortly after, the radio station and label took their business elsewhere, and not long afterward, the place closed down. He lost his entire investment. This was very bittersweet for me because I loved the place, but he ran it into the ground. The building is still standing, and I would love to bring it back to its former glory, but my pockets are deep enough yet. Maybe one day. TLDR. New skating rink owners treated employees horrible, so we all quit at the same exact time to leave him stranded. He lost a big contract with a local radio station and popular record label, which cost him big money. Rink closed down shortly after. Clarification edit. So, allow me to clarify some concerns. First off, this was a skating rink, so no alcohol. I've never seen a skating rink serve alcohol, LOL. The club night was only Saturdays. This never happened in any other day. Ever. Yes, it was insanity packed. When I say there were a lot of people, it's an understatement. Also, the parking lot in front of the building was crawling with people, and so was the one to the right of the building, which had a supermarket. A ton of people parked there, so the party overflowed. The people were allowed to walk in and out with the wristbands. I know the amount of people was excessive because the building had 4 AC system, but only 2 worked, so we would go outside through the night to cool off because the heat was overwhelming. Hence the reason customers could come and go. Yes, the crew quit. 3 of us lived on the same block and were childhood friends. The others went way back, and when I say this owner ran the place down, he ran the place down, so it wasn't a hard sell. It was no longer a fun place to work, and eventually that bled over into the customers not wanting to come back. There is another person in the comment who worked with me, and he can back it up. Yes, I was hired when I was 13, 14-ish. Yes, I was getting paid under the table. Yes, I was in middle school when I started and worked there till either the summer after 9th grade or during 10th grade. It was more than 20 years ago. Can't remember exact dates for the hair splitters. Seeing as how 3 of us lived on the same block, getting a ride wasn't a problem, and eventually we all started driving. So yeah, old enough. Yes, local radio station and local record label put on the shows. Underground hip-hop starts, that are insanely popular here still, were present every Saturday, which drew huge crowds. The other Redditor in here was the one I called, which was at about 12 a.m, and he got out of bed to come and quit. We all went to Denny's to celebrate afterwards. The revenge was flawless. It was calculated, collective, and perfectly executed, hitting Tim where it hurt most. It is satisfying to see Tim losing his staff and deal with the radio station. Very interesting Reddit story from Real Sailor Jim. How fast was the heathen going when he backed into you, father? I'm going to be deliberately vague about places and exact dates for reasons that will become apparent shortly. Any and all dialogue is to the best of my memory, and probably sounds a lot cleverer than it really was, but isn't that always how one remembers these things? Background. This incident took place back in the 1990s. I had recently been medically retired from the military and was attending college in Texas. My wife was working in her chosen field while I tried to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. One day, I left the campus, taking a route around the backside to avoid traffic. I was on my way to pick up my wife for lunch and ended up behind another car at a stop sign. The car in front of me was a brand new Chevy, one of their sleek models, the actual trade name escapes me at the moment, in candy apple red, being driven by a fairly new blonde, also a model. I, an old sailor in an old pickup, sat listening to the radio and thinking about lunch when the Chevy entered the intersection and suddenly stopped. I didn't think much of it, so I hadn't done more than put my hand on the gear shift in preparation to pull up when, with a suitable squeal of tires, the Chevy shot back at me. I quickly shifted into reverse, but it was too late. The little Chevy crashed into the front of my truck at around 30 mph. After a moment, I turned off my engine, got out of the cab, and walked around to the front of my truck. The good news was that I could see I wouldn't have to worry about that loose belt squeal anymore. The bad news was that the front of my little pickup was pretty much totaled. The grille was driven back into the radiator, water was all over the pavement, headlights smashed. I bent down and noticed oil leaking as well. With a sigh of total incomprehension, I walked up to the passenger door of the little red Chevy and its blonde driver. I was angry, but not enraged. I was still trying to figure out exactly what had happened and why she had stopped in mid-turn and put it in reverse like that. I looked through the tinted window, and she was on the phone, talking agitatedly to someone. With all the cell phone silliness I had seen since leaving the military, seeing her yapping on one didn't surprise me. Although, in hindsight, I should have wondered who exactly she was calling. Instead, I tapped on the window and she turned a blank face to me, then screamed into the phone loud enough to penetrate the glass. "Oh my God, he's got a tire iron." Naturally, I spun around and looked behind me. Then the penny dropped. I turned in a slow circle and noted there were no businesses, houses, or apartments in view, and no one on the sidewalks or walking down the roads. The only traffic was several blocks away in any direction. Her little car was sitting at the stop sign, almost exactly where it had been when I pulled in behind her. I stepped back and looked at our vehicles. It looked as if I had rear-ended her. Damn, the little trickster had set me up. I quickly walked back to my truck, thinking as fast as I could. Any minute now, a police car was going to show up, called by the little blonde, expecting to find a crazed man with a tire iron. I needed to not be that man. I pulled my tire iron out from behind my seat and threw it as far as I could into the nearby field, then jumped into my truck. It was a slim chance, but it was my only hope. I made sure the truck was in reverse, then belted myself in, slammed my face into the steering wheel, opened my door and heard sirens not too far away, and half slumped out the open door at an uncomfortable angle. I went limp just as the police car screeched to a halt. I ignored the policeman screaming at me to get out of the truck, trusting that my limp body would not prompt him to open fire. He finally edged his way over, noticed the bloody nose, tugged at an eyelid, I made sure my eye was well rolled up, and let me drop back into position. I stayed limp while he checked on the blonde, who was near hysterical with fright over the lunatic with the tire iron. Until she saw me, that is. I had hoped her rearview mirror was as off as it looked, or that she would be too preoccupied with concocting her own story to notice what I was doing. Upon seeing my body hanging limply below the driver's door of my truck, she stammered to a halt. A second set of sirens had been getting closer, and the policeman told the now silent blonde to stay in her car. A few seconds later, someone cut me out of my seatbelt and laid me on the ground. A competent set of hands checked my vitals, and within a few seconds, a harsh and demanding smell flooded my clotting nose. I fought it for a few seconds and made a convincing display of a man coming around after being knocked out. I immediately made to throw myself to the side and stopped, half being restrained and half staring wildly around to see what had happened. The medic sat back when I sat up, looked at the front end of my truck and moaned, "What the heck did that idiot do to my truck?" He told me to lie back down and started asking me professional questions about where I hurt, and if I could feel my toes and all that. Every few seconds, I'd look back at the wreck and mutter about the idiot backing up like that and what the heck he had been smoking. Little bits of angry stuff. The policeman, having gotten the blonde's statement, walked over and asked me if I felt up to talking. I said I felt fine, just a little sore. The medic okayed it and helped me to my feet. I gave the officer my license and proof of insurance and included my retired military ID card, then sat on my front seat and, as if I just noticed it, asked what had happened to my seatbelt. He explained that I had to be cut out of it, and I shrugged. Just another item for his insurance company to pay for, I guess. What the heck was his story, officer? Why did he back up that way? The policeman looked sharply at me and asked what I meant. I described exactly what had happened, but concealed the fact that I knew it was a female driving the Chevy and kept referring to her as him. After I finished, and he had written it all down, he asked if I had any proof. Proof? What do you mean, proof? I frowned at him, then let my jaw drop a bit. Hey, wait a minute. You're not telling me that idiot is saying that I did this, are you? He admitted that the other driver's story was that I had rear-ended her, not him, and then threatened her with a tire iron. I frowned again and informed him that I didn't have a tire iron, that it was sitting in the garage of my house, a couple of hours away. I moved aside as he searched the cab of my truck and caught a lucky break when he noticed, without my having to point it out to him, that my truck was still in reverse. He got out of my cab, frowning, then asked me to stay where I was and walked up to the Chevy. He then asked the blonde to step out of her car and, when she had done so, leaned into the open driver's side door. After a few seconds, he stood back up and asked the girl to repeat her statement of what happened. It was a marvelously teary bit of acting, but she almost blew it by being somewhat puzzled when he didn't react. Instead, he asked her to go on and describe everything that had happened after the accident and everything she had done then. She backed down from the tire iron story, saying that it might have simply been a reflection on her window, but insisting that I'd at least beaten on her window and that I'd simply been putting on an act for their benefit. The policeman looked over at the medic, who slowly shook his head. Years of doing search and rescue might not have done much good for me physically, but I sure as heck know what an unconscious man acts like. The policeman then asked her if she had tried to drive away, or if she had immediately shut off her engine. She said the engine had died, and no matter what lies I'd said, that she had never tried to leave the scene of the accident. The policeman nodded once and asked the medic to step over. He then asked the medic to sit in the Chevy and confirmed that it was in reverse. I love smart people. I didn't even have to suggest he check. When I last saw the little blonde, she was honestly crying. She was also handcuffed and being driven away, arrested for making a false police report, some legal mumbo-jumbo about trying to run a con, and, my favourite part, assault and battery. Once she had realised that she had blown it, about the same instant she was handcuffed, she started weeping and explaining that she didn't have the money for the payments on the car, and that her only option was to fake an accident. But I had been faking too, and hadn't been injured. You gotta believe me. She wouldn't lie about that. I signed my name to an almost letter-perfect statement of events at the police station, being careful to never mention in my own statement how my nose got banged up or how I ended up unconscious and hanging out of the door. The arresting officer's report, as well as the EMT's, had already noted that it appeared that I had either been partially ejected by the impact or might have been trying to get out of the truck at the last moment. I've always believed that one should never sign one's name to a false statement. Wisest in the long run, don't you think? It turned out that her car insurance was good, and they paid for the repair of my little pickup. The damage wasn't as bad as it originally looked, thank God. A little front-end work, a new radiator, and assorted other dinged or dented gizmos. A little cosmetic surgery to make her outside look right once more. The mechanic is even going to toss in a full overhaul, including fixing that darn fan belt. I had to drive a loaner for the next week, also courtesy of the blonde's insurance, and the irony of this will make you laugh. It was a little red Chevy. Nice car, and my wife and I had a ball riding in it, but way too expensive for a guy like me to drive every day. A car that nice might have made me try something stupid to make the payments. P.S. The title is The Punchline from a fairly appropriate joke. Extra points if you can identify it just by the punchline. Edit. Just heard my little tale of silliness read on YouTube by somebody named Mr. Reddit. I guess I've made it big time. The revenge was perfect, satisfying, and anti-Karen punch. The Karen wanted to screw up, but OP played strategically and got the Karen arrested for making a false report. It was really a cool revenge, a perfect blow to a Karen. Very interesting Reddit story from Draconian1429. Never bully your insurance company, or you lose your franchise. Hello all, Excuse any poor grammar or spelling, I'm on mobile. TLDR at bottom. Edit. Nobody has permission to share this story on other platforms. I have already seen this shared without permission, so please do not share it. This story comes from a friend of mine, Sarah, and has been building for almost 5 years until it all came crashing down over the last week. A few things to note before I get into it. Sarah works at an insurance company, dealing with a massive nationwide delivery company. Her company insures all the delivery trucks. Over the years, Sarah had seen her fair share of anger from callers, mostly justified, or people letting off steam at the anonymous voice on the other end of the phone. She's learned not to take it personal. She absolutely despises the owner of one particular franchised depot, Dick. Onto the story. We start in 2016. Dick is the franchisee of a vehicle depot for delivery company, meaning he's sort of an owner, but the company CEO could take away his ownership if they feel like it. I'm not sure exactly how this works, but as far as I understand, it's a fairly standard franchise contract, so anyone who knows about these things should have a rough idea of what Dick has to do. Dick calls in for the first time to talk to Sarah about a claim one of his drivers is making. Something simple, reversed into a wall, minimal damage, but claiming to get the vehicle repaired. Dick starts ranting and screaming about how dare his driver be expected to pay in excess. Standard. Sarah has dealt with people like this all her career, so she just deals with it as she always does. And so it continues for 2 years, with Dick bullying and abusing any call handler when he calls about a claim. It's annoying, and plenty of people have been brought to tears by it, but they can't stop serving him because he is responsible for dealing with his franchise's claims. It's now 2018, and Dick decides to get himself arrested. To give you an idea of just how stupid this man is, one of his drivers had been in a really bad accident. Nobody was seriously hurt, but the van was badly damaged. So while it was being repaired, Sarah organised for a hire van. Dick goes to the hire company to collect the van, and he's asked to make a $1 payment by debit credit card to secure the vehicle. I'm pretty sure it's so the hire company can just charge it for any damage caused while on hire, and is an industry standard in my country. Dick doesn't like this. He argues with the hire company. He threatens to dump the hire vehicle once he's finished with it. Finally, he punches the poor bloke working front desk. As previously stated, Dick gets arrested. Fast forward to a few months ago. Everyone is working from home. Yay, lockdown. And most people understand this. Everyone except Dick. He must be having a particularly bad day because his tantrum about how useless Sarah and her company is descending into personal insults. Sarah, having an equally bad day, decides that now is the moment she will get revenge on this guy for everything he has put every claim handler through. So she requests a copy of the recording of the call. All calls recorded for safety, complaints, and calling people out on their She then sends this recording to 3 people. 1. Her manager, saying she refuses to speak to Dick due to his abusive behavior. The rest of the team agree, and suddenly there is not a single claims handler willing to speak to this man. Manager says he will sort something. 2. Dick's boss, simply stating that his behavior is unacceptable, and the next time he tries to speak to someone at an insurance company that way, they will end the call. 3. Every listed CEO or board member of Dick's company. She wanted all of them to know just how vile this man was. Then, today, she gets the call she's been waiting for. A representative of delivery company has called, wanting to apologize for everything Dick put her and her team through. He also gives the best news. Dick has been downgraded from franchise owner to a lowly delivery driver. His lovely pay package, benefits, annual bonus, and company-funded car, a brand new Merc for anyone interested, have all been taken away. He now earns a little over minimum wage, 60-hour weeks to pay his bills, with his reputation in tatters. If he doesn't meet the standard for delivery drivers within the next 3 months, he'll be fired. Sarah also learned from someone she knows in the company that his wife is divorcing him because he told her she needs to get a job or they'll lose the house thanks to his sudden drop in income. Sarah hasn't yet met the new franchisee, but if I know her, she'll make it clear that she's the one who ruined Dick's life. And she isn't afraid to do it again if the new guy doesn't treat her and her colleagues with respect. Lesson: don't be a dick to call center employees. TLDR: Dick abuses call center staff for 4 years, loses big job, nice car, and wife. Edit. First, thank you all for liking, and especially to those of you who have given rewards. Second, I want to emphasize for those who have commented on the franchise part of things, I have a very limited knowledge on how this works. As far as me and Sarah know, Dick started as an employee of this place, then got the money to buy the franchise. There's something in the contracts that allows the company to take away his franchise, and since he was formerly a driver, he was given that job back on probation. Third, for the person who pointed out the description of lowly delivery driver, I should have made this clearer. This is in no way demeaning the job these wonderful people do. It's how Dick always described the position when he called. The revenge was perfect and executed flawlessly. It is Dick's abusive behavior that brought him down to his knees. OP stayed professional, waited for the right time, and finally hit where it hurts the most. Very interesting Reddit story from Stories Keller. Park in a private space and block an entrance. Pay the fines and the damages. Obligatory disclaimers. On mobile, non-English speaker, not in the US. Also, you need my permission to post elsewhere. This incident happened in the summer of 2018. I took a small part, but the real star was my landlord. A small background. It's common in my country to have apartment buildings next to houses, yard and all. I live in one such building. It has 10 apartments. 2 on each of the first 4 floors, 1 in the ground floor and 1 in the top floor. The top floor is used by the landlord when he and his family come for vacations. He lives abroad. The rest are rentals. We also have a small backyard with a side entrance, important for later. Next to the building is an empty lot, also belonging to the landlord. We use it as private parking space, with signs visibly saying it's private. It takes 10 cars, 1 per apartment, and has the side entrance. Also, I was the longest tenant, so I was the superintendent. My job was to be the liaison between the tenants and the landlord and communicate any problems and concerns to him. The problem started when the house across the street from us was sold. A lovely old lady used to live there, but when she passed away, the house fell on disarray, especially the large yard. The new owners were Ken and Karen, fake names, but lived up to the meme. They immediately began major renovations, which was acceptable. But they also started park their cars in our 2 empty spots, 1 for the landlord and 1 for the lady in the ground floor that didn't own a car. At first, we would tell they were reserved spots and they would move their cars. But when they noticed the spots remained empty, they parked there permanently. I had notified the landlord, and he told me to take pictures, log every incident, and always notify the police. We started doing that every day. Ken is a hotshot local businessman, and every time we called, the cops would cause a scene about us being jerks. He always got a fine, but he very blatantly proclaims he will not pay. The worst part came about a month before the landlord's annual visit. They stopped using one of their cars and left it permanently in front of the side entrance, blocking it. That was a huge issue. You see, the lady living in the ground floor is a renal dialysis patient and 3 times a week goes for a session in the local hospital. The ambulance brings her back and usually parked next to the side entrance because she is exhausted after a session. With Karen's car parked there, that wasn't doable anymore. They don't move it even when the police is called. I notify the landlord and try to hold our own hothead from doing anything foolish. The calmer thing he proposed was slashing their tires. Finally, our landlord arrives. I hand him the photos and the logs and he calls Ken over. Tony, the landlord, calmly explains that they are not allowed to park in our space and to move the cars. Ken's response was, "Who the hell do you think you are? I can park anywhere I want." Now, Ken thinks himself as a big fish in our small town. But Tony is a big fish in a major foreign city, and he is very creative when somebody pisses him off. He tells us to leave the spot next to the side entrance open for the weekend, and he will take care of things. We do that, and Ken parks his car next to his wife's. Sunday evening, a tow truck arrives and unloads an old Citroen DS, also known as the Frog, blocking both of their cars. Monday morning, I wake by the buzzer, and when I go downstairs, Ken and Karen are there. They are both livid. They can't move either car. Tony joins me, all smiles. Ken sees him and blows a gasket. He starts shouting and cursing. Tony, still smiling, replies, "I don't see a problem. My car is legally parked. What are you going to do about it?" Ken angrily gets into his car and reverses on the DS, crushing them both. Tony's smile became one of a shark. He immediately called the police. He pressed charges against Ken. The aftermath. Tony had legally bought the DS from his cousin that owns a car repair and restoration shop. The car was a restoration project and was insured. The court found Ken liable for the damage done. They also found out he was true to his word and hadn't paid any of the tickets. The fines for the tickets alone were almost 2,000 euro. He also leased both his cars, and they dropped him as a client immediately for purposefully causing an accident and damaging the leased car. They're sued for damages. Ken got another car, but learned his lesson and hasn't parked in our spots ever since. The revenge was flawlessly executed. Tony played the long game, using legal loopholes and patience to outsmart Ken. Blocking the cars with the Citroen DS was a brilliant move, forcing Ken to destroy his own vehicles. Very interesting Reddit story from Mob Kurt. Giving away a Master Sergeant's golf clubs. So many years ago, I was a logistician in the United States Marine Corps. My unit was headed overseas on a little mini deployment to Morocco. I was in charge of the logistics in my unit, even though I was only a corporal. This was because first, we didn't have a staff sergeant to run the shop, and the sergeants we had were garbage at logistics and got put to work for me. So anyways, we're gearing up to go on this little mini deployment, and the master sergeant, who was going to be the highest ranking enlisted, comes over to my office to chat. He starts off being real cool and then eventually asks if he can bring his golf clubs with in one of our containers. I thought to myself that it would be wise to be on his good side since I was only a corporal and going on a deployment with his company. So I agreed, even though it was against the rules and regulations. However, everyone does it all the time. So anyways, we go to Morocco and he has his clubs. No course in sight, but he was happy hitting balls, so I didn't care. However, then everything changed. His Marines didn't request to bring enough materials to build what we were there for. They start saying, I'm missing a 20th container, which doesn't happen to me. So I finally solved the mystery. It turns out they didn't request to bring enough and left the materials behind their office. So here we are in Africa to do a job, but we don't have enough materials. So he tries to use me as a scapegoat. Even a gunnery sergeant and a staff sergeant of his get in on this and just treat me like because I refused to take the fall for their shop's up. This goes on for the entire 2 months we are there, and we are in the middle of nowhere, so nothing for me to do but deal. Anyways, we start heading home and we head back to civilization to a port, and we had to clean our gear to go back to the US as per customs and biosecurity. So we are cleaning everything. Even Tank had to take tanks off their tracks and clean the tracks. It was a pain in the ass, but still a cool experience. The problem, however, was that the master sergeant kept needing to reopen containers that had been finished. Now the problem with this was that we had to have actual US customs agents on site and use their banding seals to seal the containers, which then had to be documented with the unique serial number. Every time we had to open one, I had to beg the customs agents to open them and let us get whatever the MSG needed, and them close it up without having to redo the cleaning. Normally, it is a solid no. But the agents were cool, and we worked it out. Plus, every night I usually ran into them at the bars, and I would buy them beer. It got to the point where the agents didn't even have any of their own seals left because of how many times we did it. They ended up using mine to reseal. It really made things difficult, and it was often for dumb shit. So finally I had it. It was literally the last day we had for cleaning, and of course the MSGT wanted something else. So I asked the agents. They were really fed up of it. However, I then asked, "Do either of you guys golf?" One of them said yes. I said, "Then we need 2 containers opened." So we got the dumb for the MSGT, then we went to the other container where I knew the MSGT's golf clubs were hiding. I opened the container, pulled out the clubs and gave them to the agent. He looked at me and I just said, "I don't want to hear about opening any more containers." He was cool with it and got it in his car. No issues from there on. Anyways, we get back to the States and the ship pulls in with the gear and we got it home no problem. A week later, the MSGT comes in my office. He's all buddy-buddy again. He then asks where his golf clubs were. I said, "My guess is your garage or your closet." He forces a chuckle and goes, "Haha, okay, come on, dog, where's my clubs?" I then said, "IDK, what you're talking about, MSK." He then said, "My club's in the container." I then explained to him that per the Department of Transportation Regulation, Chapter 3, I even had it down to the subchapter and paragraph letter, that no personal gear can be shipped inside of military cargo containers. He then starts getting mad, and I keep repeating the paragraph. He loses it, grabs me, but my shop's guys got to him quick and pulled him off before he swung on me. He never did find out what I did to his clubs, and I left the unit about 6 months later to go to my next command. The revenge was perfect and executed flawlessly. The MSGT's arrogance and misuse of power were met with a clever retaliation.